Zixathala pressed her 6 fingers against the cool metal surface of the observation deck and watched the small human ship drift toward the docking bay. The vessel looked so tiny compared to the massive coalition ships that usually visited Serene Watch. Its hull was plain gray metal with simple markings, nothing like the elegant curves and bright colors of proper galactic vessels. "Another human delegation," muttered Commander Vextal from behind her. "Why do we waste time with these primitives?" Zixathala didn't answer. She had been studying humans for 3 months now, ever since they had been granted their limited membership in the Hegemony Coalition. The Council had agreed to let them join mostly out of curiosity. Humans had somehow developed faster than light travel, which was impressive for such a young species. But their technology was still centuries behind even the weakest coalition member. The human ship docked with a soft thump that vibrated through the station's hull. Coalition ships used silent magnetic clamps that never made a sound. Everything about humans seemed rough and unpolished. Captain Jake Morrison was the first to step through the airlock. He was tall for a human, with short brown hair and tired-looking blue eyes. He wore a simple blue uniform with small metal badges on his chest. Nothing fancy, nothing that showed real power or authority. "Ambassador Carter will be with us shortly," Captain Morrison said to Zixathala in his strange accent. Humans spoke the common galactic language well enough, but their voices always sounded harsh compared to the musical tones of most coalition species. Ambassador Lisa Carter appeared a few minutes later. She was a middle-aged human female with gray streaks in her black hair. She smiled when she saw Zixathala, showing her small white teeth. Humans always showed their teeth when they were happy, which other species found disturbing. Teeth were for eating, not for social displays. "Thank you for meeting with us again," Ambassador Carter said. "We have some new proposals for scientific cooperation." The meeting took place in Conference Room 7, a small chamber with a round table and comfortable chairs. Dr. Alan Foster, the human cultural attaché, spread out data tablets showing their latest research. The information was basic by coalition standards, but it showed promise. "Our scientists have made progress in quantum field manipulation," Dr. Foster explained. His hands moved as he talked, another strange human habit. "We believe we can improve agricultural yields on desert worlds." Zixathala studied the data. The math was correct, but the applications were limited. "Still, it might be useful for some of the coalition's outer colonies." "This is interesting work," she said, "but the power requirements seem high." "We're still learning," Captain Morrison admitted. "Our technology is not as advanced as yours. We know this, but we're willing to work hard and learn from more experienced species." This was what Zixathala found most puzzling about humans. They admitted their weaknesses openly. Most species tried to hide their limitations during diplomatic meetings. They bragged about their achievements and downplayed their problems. But humans seemed almost eager to point out where they fell short. "Tell me about your homeworld," Zixathala said during a break in the technical discussions. "Earth, is it called?" Ambassador Carter's expression changed slightly. Not sad exactly, but something like regret. "Earth is beautiful," she said. "Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds. But it's complicated." "How so?" Dr. Foster and Captain Morrison exchanged glances. There was something in that look that Zixathala couldn't identify, some shared understanding that they didn't want to explain. "We've had many different cultures on Earth," Dr. Foster said carefully. "Many different nations and peoples. Sometimes we didn't get along very well." "You mean you had conflicts?" "Yes," Captain Morrison said quietly. "We had conflicts. This wasn't unusual. Most species went through periods of internal struggle before they developed space travel. The hegemony itself had been formed after the Great Wars that nearly destroyed 4 different civilizations. But something about the way the humans spoke suggested their conflicts had been different somehow. "We learned from our mistakes," Dr. Foster added quickly. "That's why we're so interested in joining the coalition. We want to be part of something peaceful and cooperative." The rest of the meeting went smoothly. The humans presented their proposals with careful politeness. They asked for small things: permission to establish a research station in the neutral zone, access to basic medical technology, the right to trade with coalition merchants. Nothing that would threaten anyone or change the balance of power. After the humans left, Zixathala walked to her private office and began writing her report. She described the human technology as primitive but developing, and their political system as stable but unrefined. She noted their eagerness to cooperate and their admission of technological limitations. But something bothered her about the whole meeting. It wasn't what the humans had said, but what they hadn't said. When they talked about their conflicts on Earth, there had been something in their voices. Not shame exactly, not regret in the way other species showed regret about their past mistakes. It had sounded more like experience. Zix Thala pulled up the files on human history that the Coalition Intelligence Services had gathered. The information was limited. Humans had only been in space for about 50 years, and they had only achieved faster-than-light travel 15 years ago. Before that, they had been trapped on their single world. The files showed that humans had indeed fought wars among themselves. This was normal. What struck Zix-Thala as odd was the timeline. Most species had a period of conflict followed by a period of peace before they developed space travel. The wars usually lasted a few hundred years at most. According to the records, humans had been fighting wars for thousands of years, right up until the moment they left their planet. She made a note in her report to request more detailed historical information from the human delegation. It was probably nothing important, just curiosity about an unusual species. But Zix-Thala had learned to trust her instincts during her long career in diplomatic intelligence. Outside her window, the stars shone with their usual cold light. The galaxy was peaceful now, protected by the wisdom and strength of the Coalition, 7 advanced species working together to maintain order and prevent conflicts. Zix-Thala looked at the docking bay where the human ship had been. It was empty now, just metal walls and flashing lights. The humans were probably halfway back to their territory by now, carrying news of another successful diplomatic meeting. She tried to shake off the strange feeling that had settled over her during the meeting. Humans were weak, primitive, and eager to learn. They posed no threat to anyone. The council had made the right decision in accepting them as junior members. Still, she made one more note in her report. Recommend continued monitoring of human activities and expanded cultural exchange to better understand their historical development. It seemed like a reasonable precaution. After all, knowledge was never dangerous. The first distress signal came at 0347 station time. Zix-Thala was sleeping when the alert klaxons began wailing throughout Serene Watch. She rolled out of her rest pod and activated her personal communicator. Emergency session in the command center, announced Station Commander Ralphie. All senior staff report immediately. Zix-Thala threw on her uniform and hurried through the corridors. Other Coalition officers were moving with the same urgent purpose. Emergency alerts were rare. The galaxy had been peaceful for decades. The command center buzzed with activity. Technicians worked at their stations while holographic displays showed star charts and communication logs. Commander Ralphie stood in the center of it all, his forearms moving quickly between different control panels. "What's the situation?" asked Zix-Thala. "Attack on New Eden," Ralphie replied without looking up. "Human colony world. Early reports suggest orbital bombardment followed by ground invasion." Zix-Thala felt her blood chill. New Eden was one of the newer human colonies established just 5 years ago. She had read about it in the diplomatic files. A peaceful farming world with about 2 million inhabitants. Families who had left Earth looking for a quiet life among the stars. Who's attacking them? Korath Empire. The name hit Zix-Thala like a physical blow. The Korath were one of the most savage species in known space. They had been expelled from Coalition territory 3 years ago, after being found guilty of systematic genocide on 6 different worlds. Their warriors were known for taking prisoners only to torture them for entertainment. "How many ships?" "At least 50, said Lieutenant Mordeck from his communication station. "Full battle fleet. They came out of nowhere and hit the orbital defenses first. The human ships never had a chance." Zix-Thala moved to an empty workstation and pulled up the tactical data. The attack had been perfectly planned. The Korath had jumped into the system at multiple points surrounding the planet before the human defenders could react. Their ships were bigger and better armed than anything in the human fleet. "What about the human defense forces?" "Destroyed or scattered," Mordeck reported. "We're picking up distress calls from individual ships, but they're running for their lives. The planet is defenseless." More reports came in over the next few hours. The Korath had begun landing troops on New Eden's surface. They were systematically destroying human settlements and taking prisoners. Worse, they were broadcasting their activities on open channels, making sure every human in space could see what was happening to their people. The images were horrible. Korath warriors dragging human families from their homes. Execution squads lining up civilians against walls. Children crying as their parents were shot in front of them. The Korath wanted everyone to watch. They wanted to spread terror. At 800, Commander Ryan Phillips of the Human Defense Fleet managed to establish contact with Serene Watch. His face appeared on the main screen, showing burns on his cheek and desperation in his eyes. "We need help," he said without any diplomatic politeness. "They're killing everyone down there. Women, children, elderly people who never hurt anyone. Please, you have to send ships." Commander Ralphie looked uncomfortable. "Commander Phillips, this is a matter for the Coalition Council to decide. We cannot take military action without proper authorization. How long will that take? The Council will meet as soon as all members can be reached. Perhaps 48 hours. Phillips closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they looked older. 48 hours. Do you know what the Korath can do to a planet in 48 hours? We understand your concern, but there are proper procedures. Phillips cut the transmission. Over the next day, more disturbing reports came in. The Korath weren't just killing humans quickly. They were taking their time, making examples, trying to break the will of any survivors. They had set up camps where they kept human prisoners for public executions. They broadcast everything, sending the signals directly to human colonies throughout their territory. Zixthala found herself watching the transmissions even though they made her sick. She had seen warfare before, but never anything this deliberate and cruel. The Korath weren't fighting a battle. They were putting on a show. The Coalition Council finally convened 36 hours after the attack began. Zixthala was allowed to observe from the diplomatic gallery as representatives from all 7 member species appeared on the communication screens. The debate was polite and procedural. Council member Vexhala argued that the Coalition should not interfere in conflicts involving non-member species. Council member Rathgon suggested that the humans had brought this on themselves by establishing colonies in dangerous territory. Council member Dekthon worried that military intervention might provoke the Korath into attacking Coalition worlds. Perhaps, suggested Council member Yilmata, this unfortunate incident will teach the humans about the realities of galactic politics. They are still very young and naive. Several other council members made sounds of agreement. Zixthala watched, in growing horror as the most powerful government in the galaxy, calmly discussed whether to save 2 million people from torture and death. Ambassador Lisa Carter appeared on screen from the human embassy station. She looked like she had aged 10 years in the past 2 days. "Honored council members, I beg you to reconsider. These are innocent civilians. They have done nothing to deserve this." "Regrettable, certainly," said Council member Vexhala, "but the Coalition cannot be expected to protect every species from the consequences of their own poor decisions." "What poor decisions? Setting up farms on an empty world?" "Establishing colonies without adequate defenses," replied Council member Rathgon. "In our experience, weak species either learn to protect themselves or they disappear. This is the natural order." Ambassador Carter was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was completely calm. "I see. Then humanity will withdraw our request for coalition assistance." "A wise decision," said Council member Yilmata. "Perhaps in the future your species will be better prepared for the challenges of galactic civilization." "Perhaps we will," Carter said quietly. "Thank you for your time, honored council members." The transmission ended. Within an hour, every human diplomatic mission in coalition space had packed up and left. They didn't argue, didn't complain, didn't make demands. They just gathered their belongings and departed with polite farewell messages. Zixthala tried to contact Captain Morrison, but his ship had already left Serene Watch's space. She sent messages to other human contacts, but received only automated replies saying that human diplomatic relations were temporarily suspended. That evening, she stood on the observation deck where she had first watched Morrison's ship arrive. The stars looked the same as always, cold and distant. But something had changed. The humans had come to them asking for help, and the coalition had turned them away. Intelligence reports over the next few days showed strange activity in human space. Civilian ships were moving in organized patterns. Cargo vessels, passenger liners, even small private craft were converging on specific coordinates. The movements appeared random, but Zixathala had spent years studying patterns in diplomatic intelligence. The humans were organizing something. She tried to convince Commander Ralphie to investigate, but he was not interested. "They're probably evacuating their remaining colonies," he said, "running away before the Korath find them. Cowardly, but understandable for such a weak species." On New Eden, the Korath continued their systematic destruction. By the end of the first week, they had killed over 500,000 humans and enslaved most of the survivors. They had turned the planet's major cities into smoking ruins and contaminated the farmland with biological weapons. The broadcasts continued, but they were reaching fewer and fewer human receivers. Most human colonies had gone silent, their communication arrays shut down or abandoned. The few ships that Coalition monitors detected in human space were running dark, their transponders switched off. It was as if humanity was holding its breath. Zixathala made her final entry in the incident report. Human species appears to have accepted defeat and withdrawn from contested territories. Korath occupation of New Eden proceeding without resistance. Recommend continued monitoring to ensure conflict does not spread to Coalition space. She sealed the file and sent it to Intelligence Headquarters. Outside her window, space looked empty and peaceful. But somewhere in that darkness, 2 million humans were dying while their government did nothing to save them. It made no sense. What kind of species abandoned their own people? 3 weeks after the fall of New Eden, the first Korath supply convoy simply vanished. Zixathala was reviewing trade reports when the intelligence brief crossed her desk. A fleet of 12 Korath cargo ships had been traveling from their supply depot in the Zarion system to New Eden. They had been scheduled to arrive 2 days ago. Instead, they had disappeared somewhere between the two star systems. "Navigation error," Commander Ralphie said when she brought it to his attention. "The Korath aren't known for their careful planning. Probably jumped into an asteroid field or miscalculated their fuel requirements." Zixathala wasn't so sure. The Korath were brutal, but they weren't stupid. They had been running supply lines across their territory for decades. She made a note to watch for similar incidents. She didn't have to wait long. 4 days later, a Korath listening post on the edge of New Eden's solar system went silent. The automated monitoring station had been transmitting regular status updates every 6 hours. Then the signal stopped. A Korath patrol ship was dispatched to investigate. When it arrived, the crew found the station completely intact. All systems were operational. Life support was working perfectly and there were no signs of damage or malfunction. But the 12-person crew was gone, not killed. Not captured, just gone, as if they had walked into empty space and vanished. Zixathala started paying closer attention to intelligence reports from the region. Over the next week, 3 more incidents occurred. Another supply convoy disappeared. A communication relay satellite went offline for 6 hours, then came back online with no explanation. A Korath mining operation reported that half their automated equipment had malfunctioned simultaneously, causing a complete shutdown of their operations. Taken individually, the incidents could be explained as accidents or equipment failures, but together they formed a pattern that made Zixathala's skin crawl. Someone was fighting back. She began monitoring human communication traffic, using the long-range sensors that Serene Watch used to keep track of ship movements throughout the sector. What she found disturbed her more than the mysterious attacks on the Korath. Human ships were moving, not running away, as Commander Ralphie had assumed. They were moving with purpose, following routes that looked random but contained an underlying structure. Cargo ships that should have been fleeing the Korath were instead converging on coordinates deep in human space. Passenger liners that should have been evacuating civilians were traveling to empty systems and staying there for days at a time. Most disturbing of all, the humans had stopped talking. For months, Coalition monitors had been picking up routine human communications, ship-to-ship chatter, colonial administrative messages, civilian news broadcasts, the normal background noise of a spacefaring civilization. Now there was almost nothing. Just brief coded transmissions that used encryption the Coalition computers couldn't break. Sixth Thala tried to contact the human embassy, but received an automated message. Human diplomatic services are currently unavailable. Thank you for your inquiry. She tried reaching individual human contacts she had worked with, including Captain Morrison and Ambassador Carter. Every attempt got the same response. Currently unavailable. It was as if the entire human species had suddenly decided to stop talking to the outside galaxy. Commander Ralphie remained uninterested. They're probably organizing refugee camps, he said. Or maybe they've given up on space travel entirely and gone back to their homeworld. Either way, it's not our problem. But Zixathala had spent too many years in intelligence work to dismiss the situation so easily.
She began digging deeper into human activities.
Using every monitoring tool available to Serene, watch what she found made her question everything she thought she knew about humanity. The cargo ships that had been moving in seemingly random patterns were actually following a carefully coordinated plan. Ships would meet at predetermined coordinates, transfer personnel and equipment, then disperse to new locations. It was a logistics operation on a scale that impressed even Zixthala, who had seen the Coalition Navy coordinate movements of thousands of vessels. More importantly, the ships involved weren't just civilian craft. Hidden among the cargo vessels and passenger liners were military ships that had never appeared in any Coalition database. Sleek, dark-hulled vessels that moved without transponder signals and seemed designed to avoid detection. Where had they come from? The Coalition intelligence services had detailed records of the human military. They were supposed to have maybe 50 warships, all of them small and lightly armed. But the sensor readings Zixathala was collecting suggested a fleet at least 10 times that size. She decided to try a different approach and began monitoring human personnel files. If civilians were being evacuated, there should be records of people leaving human space and seeking refuge elsewhere. Instead, she found the opposite. Humans who had been living in Coalition space for years were quietly returning to human territory. Scientists who had been working at Coalition research facilities submitted resignation letters and disappeared. Human merchants who had been trading throughout the galaxy suddenly closed their businesses and left. Even more puzzling, some of these departing humans had backgrounds that didn't match their supposed occupations. A human anthropologist who had been studying Coalition culture turned out to have advanced degrees in military engineering. A trade representative had previously worked in something called psychological operations, a cultural exchange. Student had training in what human files described as asymmetric warfare. Zixthala began to wonder if the Coalition had ever really understood what humans were doing in their space. The breakthrough came when she intercepted a fragment of human communication that the encryption software had managed to decode. It was just a few words, part of a longer message. But they chilled her to the bone. The wolves are gathering. The message had come from Lieutenant Colonel Kate Murphy, listed in Coalition files as a cultural liaison officer from the human military.
Zixthala had met her twice during diplomatic functions.
Murphy had seemed like a typical human, polite, eager to learn, slightly intimidated by the advanced Coalition technology. But the message suggested something different. Time to remind the galaxy why we kept our fangs. Fangs? Wolves? What did these terms mean in human culture? Zixathala tried to access human cultural databases to understand the references, but found that most human information sources had become unavailable. Even basic historical records that had been freely shared months ago were now protected by security protocols she couldn't break. She made one more attempt to contact human authorities directly. This time, she used official Coalition diplomatic channels and identified herself as a senior intelligence officer. Surely they would respond to an official inquiry. The response came 12 hours later. It was brief and formal, transmitted from an unknown location by someone who identified himself only as human authority. The Coalition Council made their position clear regarding human affairs. Humanity is currently handling internal reorganization and is unavailable for diplomatic contact. We appreciate the Coalition's previous guidance and will contact you when we are ready to resume normal relations. The message was perfectly polite and completely terrifying. There was something in the tone, a cold confidence that hadn't been there before. These weren't the desperate, pleading humans who had begged for help 3 weeks ago. Zixathala filed her report with growing unease. She described the unusual human activities and recommended increased monitoring of their territory. She noted the disappearance of Korath assets and suggested a possible connection to human activities. Though she had no proof, most importantly, she recommended that the coalition reconsider its assessment of human capabilities. The response from intelligence headquarters came back within hours. Report noted, continue monitoring, but do not interfere with human activities unless they pose direct threat to coalition interests. Human species remains classified as low priority concern. Sixthala stared at the message for a long time. Then she looked out at the stars and wondered if the coalition was making the biggest mistake in its history. Somewhere in the darkness, the humans were preparing something. And based on what had been happening to the Korath, it was going to be very unpleasant for someone. The human counterattack began not with explosions or battle fleets, but with silence. Sixthala was monitoring routine communications when Korath transmissions started failing. At first it seemed like normal technical problems. A communication satellite here, a relay station there, all going offline for a few minutes before coming back online. But the failures were spreading. Within 6 hours, half the Korath communication network had experienced some kind of malfunction. Navigation computers on their ships began giving incorrect readings. Life support systems switched off randomly, then switched back on. Weapon systems refused to arm, or armed themselves without orders. Commander Ralthi called it a cascade failure, the kind of technical disaster that sometimes hit complex systems. Probably overloaded their networks, he said. The Korath never were good with technology. Sixthala wasn't convinced. The failures were too coordinated, too systematic. Someone was causing this. The Korath seemed to realize it too. Their emergency communications were frantic, with ship commanders reporting that their own equipment was turning against them. But every time they tried to coordinate a response, their communication systems would fail at critical moments. Then the hunting began. The first Korath warship died near the edge of the New Eden system. According to the automated distress beacon, the vessel had been patrolling normally when its navigation system malfunctioned, sending it into an asteroid field. When rescue ships arrived, they found debris scattered across several thousand kilometers. The second ship died 2 days later. This time, the distress signal reported a catastrophic failure of all primary systems, before cutting off abruptly. The rescue team found an empty hull drifting in space. No crew, no signs of battle, no explanation for what had happened. By the end of the first week, the Korath had lost 12 ships without ever seeing their attackers. Sixthala watched the reports with growing fascination and terror. Someone was systematically dismantling the Korath fleet, using methods she had never seen before. Not direct attacks, but something far more sophisticated and deadly. The revelation came when a human ship decloaked less than 50 kilometers from Serene Watch. One moment, the sensors showed empty space. The next, a massive vessel hung motionless against the stars, its dark hull seeming to bend light around its edges. The ship was easily twice the size of anything in the Coalition database for human vessels, and it bristled with weapon systems that definitely didn't belong to a primitive species. Every alarm on Serene Watch began screaming at once. Unknown vessel. Identify yourself, Commander Ralthi transmitted, his voice shaking slightly. The response came immediately, broadcast on all frequencies, so that every coalition ship in the sector would receive it. This is Admiral Jack Turner of the human Navy vessel Retribution. We are not here to threaten coalition forces. We are here to collect our people. Sixthala stared at the holographic display showing the human ship. The design was nothing like the simple, functional vessel she had seen before. This was a predator made manifest, built for one purpose only. Admiral Turner, Commander Ralthi replied, "This is Coalition space. You are in violation of the territorial agreements." Turner's response was calm and patient, like a teacher explaining something to a slow student. "Commander, 3 weeks ago, 2 million human civilians were murdered while the Coalition debated proper procedures. The territorial agreements became irrelevant at that moment. More human ships began decloaking throughout the system, not just warships, but support vessels, transports, and craft of designs that Coalition databases couldn't identify. Within minutes, what had seemed like empty space was filled with a human fleet that dwarfed the Coalition garrison. "How many ships do they have?" whispered Commander Ralthi. Lieutenant Mordek was frantically working at his sensor station. I count over 200 vessels, sir. And these are just the ones that have decloaked. 200 ships. The Coalition Intelligence Services had estimated that humans possessed maybe 50 military vessels in total. Either the estimates had been catastrophically wrong, or the humans had been hiding their true capabilities from the beginning. Admiral Turner continued his broadcast. All Coalition forces are advised to maintain position and avoid interference with human operations. We have no quarrel with the Coalition, but we will not tolerate any attempt to prevent us from completing our mission. What mission? Commander Ralphie asked. The answer came not from Turner but from Captain Morrison, whose familiar voice cut across the communication channel. The liberation of New Eden and the complete elimination of Korath forces in this sector. Morrison's ship appeared on screen, but like Turner's vessel, it bore no resemblance to the simple craft Zixthala had known. This ship was a weapon of war, sleek and deadly, with scanning arrays and weapon systems that made Coalition vessels look like toys. Captain Morrison, Zixthala transmitted on a private channel. What happened to the humans I knew? The diplomats who wanted peace? Morrison's face appeared on her personal screen. The tired-looking man she had met months ago was gone, replaced by someone with cold, calculating eyes. We still want peace, Zixthala, but we learned something important 3 weeks ago. The galaxy doesn't respect peaceful species. It only respects strong ones. You can't win against the Korath. They have hundreds of ships, thousands of warriors. Had, Morrison corrected quietly. Past tense. Over the next 48 hours, Zixthala watched the humans demonstrate exactly what they meant. The attack on the main Korath fleet was not a battle. It was a dissection. Human ships appeared from impossible angles, moving with coordination that suggested they had been planning this operation for far longer than 3 weeks. They didn't charge into battle like most species. Instead, they moved like surgeons cutting apart the Korath formation with precise, devastating strikes. Captain Maya Rodriguez, commanding a vessel called Vengeance, broadcast a message to the Korath fleet before the attack began. You killed our children. Now we return the favor. What followed was the most methodical destruction Zixthala had ever witnessed. The humans didn't just destroy Korath ships, they systematically eliminated the enemy's ability to fight, to flee, or to call for help. Communication arrays were the first targets, leaving Korath commanders unable to coordinate their defense. Then engines stranding enemy vessels in space. Finally, life support systems. The Korath warriors, who had built their reputation on savage close combat fighting, never got the chance to engage. They died in the cold vacuum of space, cut off from their ships and their comrades. But the true horror came during the liberation of New Eden. Commander Scott Davis, previously listed in Coalition files as a minor intelligence officer, turned out to be the architect of something the galaxy had never seen. Every piece of Korath equipment on the planet's surface began malfunctioning simultaneously. Weapons exploded in their wielders' hands. Communication systems broadcast false orders. Transport vehicles drove themselves into walls. The Korath had been using the planet's own communication infrastructure to coordinate their occupation. Now that infrastructure turned against them, broadcasting the locations of every Korath unit to the human forces descending from orbit. What the humans did to the Korath on New Eden's surface was not warfare. It was extermination. They hunted down every single enemy soldier, with methods that demonstrated an understanding of ground combat that spanned centuries. No quarter was given. No prisoners were taken. The surviving human colonists, those who had endured 3 weeks of Korath brutality, were evacuated with careful precision. Medical ships arrived to treat the wounded. Transport vessels carried away the traumatized survivors. The humans took care of their own with the same methodical efficiency they used to destroy their enemies. Within 72 hours, the Korath presence in the New Eden system had been completely eliminated. Not defeated, eliminated, as if they had never existed. Zixthala found herself staring at tactical displays that made no sense. A species that had been classified as primitive and weak had just accomplished something that would have challenged even the full military might of the Coalition. Admiral Turner's final broadcast was brief and terrifying in its simplicity. Any species that harms human civilians will face the consequences. We tried diplomacy. We tried cooperation. We tried asking politely for help. None of that worked. So now we're back to what we do best. As the human fleet prepared to leave the system, Morrison contacted Zixathala one last time. "You should tell your council what you witnessed here," he said quietly. "Not as a threat, but as information. We want to be part of the galactic community. We want peace and cooperation. But we will never again stand by helplessly while our people are murdered." "What are you?" Zixathala whispered. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words changed everything she thought she knew about humanity. "We're the species that spent 10,000 years learning how to kill each other efficiently. We came to the stars hoping we could be something else. But if the galaxy won't let us be peaceful, we'll show them what we learned during those 10,000 years." The human fleet disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind empty space and the smoking remains of what had once been the most feared military force in the sector. 2 weeks after the destruction of the Korath forces, Dr. Susan Blake agreed to meet with Zixathala aboard the rebuilt New Horizon. The human ship looked different now, larger, more heavily armed, with the confident bearing of a vessel that had seen combat and survived. Zixathala had requested the meeting through official coalition channels, but she came alone, without any diplomatic protection or recording devices. She needed to understand what she had witnessed, and she suspected that understanding would not come through formal interviews. Dr. Blake was a small, middle-aged human woman with graying brown hair and kind eyes. She wore a simple blue uniform with no weapons, no armor, nothing that suggested the terrifying military capabilities Zixathala had recently observed. She looked exactly like what she claimed to be, a historian and cultural specialist. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," Zixathala said as they settled into comfortable chairs in the ship's small conference room. "I have questions about what happened at New Eden." "I'm sure you do," Dr. Blake replied quietly. "But I think your real questions are about humanity itself, about what we really are." Zixathala studied the human woman's face. There was sadness there and regret, but also something like resignation. "The Coalition Intelligence Services spent months analyzing your culture, your technology, your military capabilities. How did we get everything so wrong?" Dr. Blake was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. When she spoke, her words were careful and precise. "You studied our diplomacy, our peaceful intentions, our desire to join the galactic community. All of that was real. Everything we told you about wanting cooperation and scientific exchange was completely true. But you never bothered to study our history. You looked at our technology and saw primitive ships with weak weapons. You looked at our military and saw a small force with limited capabilities. You assumed that was all we were." Dr. Blake activated a portable display unit and began showing images that made Zixathala's skin crawl. Ancient human battlefields covered with bodies, vast cities reduced to smoking ruins, weapons of incredible destructive power unleashed against human populations. "This is Earth's history," Dr. Blake explained. "For over 10,000 years we fought wars against ourselves. Not simple territorial disputes or resource conflicts. Total wars where entire civilizations tried to destroy each other completely." The images continued. Humans fighting with primitive weapons, then advanced ones, then weapons that could destroy cities in a single blast. The technology evolved, but the warfare never stopped. "We developed faster than light travel not because we were curious about the stars," Dr. Blake continued. "We developed it because we needed to escape what we had become. Earth was dying from our wars. Our oceans were poisoned, our atmosphere was toxic, and we had turned whole continents into graveyards." Zixathala stared at images of human children being taught to use weapons, of families hiding in underground shelters while their cities burned above them. "This is your normal history?" "This was our only history until about 60 years ago. Every human culture, every human nation, every human ideology, all of them spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare. Not against alien species, but against other humans." Dr. Blake switched to tactical displays that showed human military formations, weapon systems, and strategic concepts. Even to Zixathala's trained eye, the information was sophisticated beyond anything she had seen from other species. "When we came to the Coalition, we brought our diplomatic corps and our civilian scientists. We didn't bring our military historians, our strategic planners, or our weapons designers. We wanted to be peaceful. We thought we could leave all of that behind. But you couldn't. When the Korath attacked New Eden, they made a fundamental mistake. They assumed we were like other species, that we would fight the way other species fight. They expected us to send our ships against their ships, to meet them in honest battle where their superior numbers and technology would give them victory. Dr. Blake's expression hardened slightly. They didn't understand that humans have never fought honest battles. We spent 10 millennia learning to win wars against opponents who were just as clever, just as ruthless, and just as desperate as we were. Every tactic you saw at New Eden, every strategy we employed, every principle of warfare we used, we learned it by fighting ourselves. The full implications of this hit Zixthala like a physical blow. You've been studying warfare for your entire history, not studying it, living it. Every human culture independently developed the same concepts: deception, misdirection, asymmetric warfare, psychological operations, total war. We didn't read about these things in textbooks. We used them to survive. Captain Tyler Brooks entered the conference room carrying a data tablet and moving with the quiet confidence of a professional soldier. He was younger than Morrison, but his eyes held the same cold calculation that Zixthala had learned to recognize in human military personnel. Dr. Blake is being modest, Brooks said as he joined them at the table. She's not just a historian. She designed half the psychological warfare campaign we used against the Korath. Zixthala looked between the two humans with growing horror. You're all soldiers. We're all survivors, Dr. Blake corrected. Every human alive today is descended from people who lived through 10,000 years of constant warfare. The ones who weren't good at fighting died. The ones who couldn't adapt to new weapons, new tactics, new forms of warfare. They didn't pass on their genes. Brooks activated his data tablet and showed Zixthala statistical analyses that made her head spin. The Coalition Intelligence Services estimated that we had 50 military vessels. They were wrong by a factor of about 40. We've been building ships for 60 years, but we've been hiding them because we wanted to be trusted. Hidden where? Asteroid belts, gas giant atmospheres, dead systems that nobody bothers to survey. We learned camouflage and concealment fighting each other for thousands of years. Hiding a fleet from Coalition sensors was not technically challenging. The scope of the deception was staggering. For months, Coalition observers had been watching a carefully constructed facade, while the real human military prepared in secret. Every civilian ship you saw was also a potential warship, Dr. Blake added. Every human colony had hidden weapons stockpiles. Every human citizen in Coalition space was also an intelligence agent, gathering information about your capabilities and weaknesses. You were planning to attack us? Brooks shook his head. We were planning to defend ourselves. We knew that eventually someone would test humanity's resolve. We hoped it would never happen, but we prepared for it anyway. Why? Zixthala asked desperately. Why couldn't you just be peaceful? Dr. Blake's expression softened with genuine sadness. Because the galaxy wouldn't let us. We tried diplomacy, cooperation, cultural exchange, all the things that peaceful species are supposed to do. But when our people were being murdered, the Coalition told us it wasn't their problem. You could have asked for help differently. We begged, Brooks interrupted, his voice hard. We got on our knees and begged the most powerful government in the galaxy to save 2 million innocent people. And you told us to handle it ourselves. The terrible logic of it hit Zixthala all at once. The humans had tried to be peaceful, but the galaxy had taught them that peaceful species get destroyed, so they had reverted to what they knew best. What happens now? She asked quietly. Dr. Blake and Captain Brooks exchanged glances. There was something in that look that reminded Zixthala of the communication she had seen between Morrison and the other humans months ago, a shared understanding that outsiders weren't meant to comprehend. Now we go back to our territory and continue building our civilization, Dr. Blake said. We'll trade with anyone who wants to trade. We'll cooperate on scientific projects. We'll be good neighbors, but no one will ever again make the mistake the Korath made, Brooks finished. Word is already spreading throughout the galaxy about what happened at New Eden. Other species are beginning to understand that humans are not prey. Thala thought about the tactical displays she had studied, the methodical efficiency of the human attack, the complete destruction of an enemy force that had been considered unbeatable. Are you going to expand? Conquer other species? Why would we? Dr. Blake asked, sounding genuinely puzzled. We have everything we need. We don't want anyone else's territory or resources. We just want to be left alone to build something better than what we had on Earth. But you have the capability. Of course we do. Brooke said matter-of-factly. We could probably conquer half the galaxy if we wanted to. But conquest requires occupation. Occupation requires administration. And administration requires caring about what happens to the conquered peoples. We learned a long time ago that it's much easier to simply make it clear that attacking us is a bad idea. As Ixthala prepared to leave the human ship, Dr. Blake walked with her to the airlock. The older woman seemed genuinely sorry about how things had developed. I want you to understand something, Dr. Blake said quietly. We didn't want any of this to happen. We came to the stars hoping we could be different. We thought maybe away from Earth we could finally learn to live without warfare. But you couldn't.